Trent slammed a stack of papers on the table so hard that my coffee cup jumped. I watched the brown liquid slosh across the white folder, but no one seemed to care. We were in the conference room on the 3rd floor, past 9 in the morning. HR was already sitting there with serious faces. My badge had deactivated in my hand moments before, the little red light blinking once and going dark. I looked around at the faces staring at me like I was some criminal they'd just caught. "Explain this, Paisley." Trent's voice boomed across the room. Screenshots of logins glowed on the monitor behind him. My name was on every single one. But I wasn't there when any of them happened. I felt humiliation spreading like fire across my skin, burning from my neck all the way up to my ears. Everyone stared like they were watching a public execution. I managed to whisper, "I didn't do this." Trent smirked. That smirk was the worst part. It wasn't the face of someone who believed I was guilty. It was the face of someone who knew exactly what he'd done and was enjoying my suffering. I spotted something strange on the printouts then. Something he shouldn't have overlooked. A timestamp that made no sense. My heart gave a small jump of hope. As security escorted me toward the elevator, I felt numb and shocked. Trent was watching me leave, his arms crossed. But then I noticed something. His eyes flicked away from the screen too fast, like he was suddenly nervous. That tiny movement told me everything. He'd made a mistake. That's when I remembered my background script running on my workstation. I'd installed it weeks ago just for my own protection. It logged everything, every login, every file access, every remote override. My heart started beating faster. I had proof. I had documentation. I had everything I needed. HR told me to expect a termination meeting in 48 hours. They gave me a folder with severance information, but I barely heard what they were saying. My mind was already somewhere else, already planning. The elevator doors opened and closed behind me. I walked out into the lobby and into the cold air. The walk to my car felt like forever. I kept thinking about that little script, quietly recording everything while I worked. While Trent hacked my account. While he framed me for crimes I never committed. This wasn't over. Let me tell you who I actually am because it matters. My name is Paisley Martinez. I'm a senior compliance analyst at Hartwell Financial Services, working there for almost 5 years. I'm the kind of person people come to when they have problems. I'm meticulous to a fault. I check my work twice, then check it again. I never miss deadlines. I never cut corners. I never imagined that my biggest problem would be the man I reported to every day. Trent Vickers had been my manager for 3 years. He was charming when he needed to be. But underneath was something darker. Something cold. I'd seen it before, but never directed at me like this. I used to think that hard work and honesty meant something in business. I thought that if you did your job well and didn't cause trouble, you'd be fine. I was so wrong about that. It all started the day I found Trent's first mistake. That day changed everything. That day put us on a path toward this exact moment. Me, fired and humiliated, walking across the parking lot with nothing but a folder and a sliver of hope. About 8 months before the ambush, I discovered something that shouldn't have existed. I was reviewing client transfer documentation when I noticed that Trent had approved a transfer incorrectly. The paperwork was wrong. The authorization chain was broken. It was the kind of mistake that could cause serious problems. I could have reported it immediately. I could have gone to his supervisor. But I didn't. I quietly made the correction myself. I fixed it privately so that no one would ever know. I thought I was being kind. I thought I was being helpful. I thought Trent would appreciate that I was protecting him from his own mistake. When I told him what I'd found and fixed, his face did something strange. His mouth smiled, but his eyes went cold. He thanked me through clenched teeth, and I remember thinking that something was wrong. Something about the way he looked at me felt like a threat. That was the first time I felt his resentment building inside him like a storm cloud. I didn't understand it then. I thought maybe he was just embarrassed. I thought maybe he just needed time to get over it. I was wrong about that too. A few weeks after I corrected his mistake, Trent asked me to adjust a record in one of our client accounts. He didn't give me a good reason. He just said it needed to be done quietly, without telling anyone else. The request made my skin crawl. I knew it was unethical. I knew it violated company policy. I knew it could put both of us in trouble. So I said no. I was calm about it. I was respectful. I wasn't rude or argumentative. I just politely explained that I couldn't do it because it wasn't right. He laughed it off like I'd made a joke, but his eyes went cold again. That's when I realized something was fundamentally wrong with him. Something was broken inside. After that, everything changed. The hostility began slowly and quietly. My workload increased dramatically. Trent started assigning me late-night tasks marked as urgent, even though they clearly weren't. He started nitpicking my work in public meetings, pointing out tiny mistakes that didn't matter. He made me feel small in front of my colleagues. He was systematically trying to make me look bad every single day. I overheard him complaining about me to upper management. He was telling them that I wasn't a team player, that I was resistant to change, that I couldn't be trusted with important projects. That's when Trent started elevating his favorite analyst, a guy named Drew. Drew was nice enough, but he was also new. He didn't have nearly as much experience as I did. Yet suddenly Drew was getting opportunities that I'd worked years to earn. He was invited to meetings that I usually led. He was being pulled into projects that should have been mine. I watched it happen and felt myself getting pushed further to the edges of the team. I was becoming invisible. Or worse, I was becoming the person that nobody wanted on their projects. The problem employee. The one who wouldn't play ball. One day I came back from lunch and something felt different about my computer. I couldn't explain it exactly, but something was off. It was like someone had touched it or used it while I was gone. I checked the login history, but it showed I'd been the last one logged in. There was no evidence that anyone else had accessed my computer. But I knew someone had. I could feel it in my bones. I reported it to IT. I told them I thought someone might have been using my computer without permission. They barely listened. They told me to change my password and use a screensaver lock. That was it. No investigation. After that, strange things started happening more often. I'd get password reset notifications that I never requested. The system would say that I'd logged in from locations where I'd never been. I'd see access records for files I'd never opened. It was like someone was stealing my identity piece by piece. I reported it again. I told them someone was hacking my account. I explained that this was serious. I brought documentation. They still dismissed it. They said it was probably just a glitch. They suggested that maybe I was confused about what I'd accessed. That's when I knew I had to take matters into my own hands. Late one night after everyone had gone home, I installed a tiny audit script on my workstation. It was just a piece of code that would log everything that happened on my computer. Every override, every remote session, every file access, every place the login attempt came from. I set it to automatically back up to a secure cloud location that only I could access. I told absolutely no one about it. I went home that night and tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't shut off. I kept thinking about what might happen if I was right. What if someone really was hacking my account? What if I was about to discover something that would change everything? For weeks, nothing unusual showed up in the logs. Everything was normal. I started to wonder if maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the IT department was right and it was just a glitch. Maybe I was imagining problems that didn't exist. Maybe I should just stop worrying and focus on my job. Then one day, the little anomalies I'd been tracking just stopped happening. No more password resets. No more mysterious login attempts. No more files I didn't remember accessing. It was like someone had decided to turn off the attacks. That silence lasted for exactly 3 weeks. Then Trent suddenly became overly cheerful around me. He started being nice. He'd stop by my desk and ask how my day was going. He'd make jokes in meetings. He'd compliment my work in front of people. It was completely different from how he'd been treating me, and it felt deeply wrong. I knew something was coming. I could feel it the way you can feel a storm before it arrives. The air gets heavy. The pressure changes. Everything feels off. HR scheduled a performance review conversation with me. Nothing unusual except that it was scheduled for the next day and marked urgent. My stomach twisted when I read the calendar invitation. Something was happening. Something big was about to come down on me. The next morning I walked into the HR meeting. Trent was already there, sitting across the table with a stack of papers. He had this expression on his face that I'll never forget. It was a mix of triumph and barely concealed anger. HR looked uncomfortable, like they'd been put in an awkward position. Trent presented his case against me. He brought up cherry-picked mistakes. He showed them errors that weren't actually mine. He explained them in ways that made me sound incompetent or careless. I calmly refuted each point. I explained what really happened. I showed them the correct documentation. But the room felt one-sided despite my defenses. I could see it in the faces of the HR people. They'd already made up their minds. Trent had gotten to them first. He'd filled their heads with his version of events before I ever had a chance. Trent ended with a devastating line. "We'll be monitoring your access more closely going forward," he said. "We can't have people in sensitive positions making these kinds of mistakes." The way he said it made me sound like a liability. Like I was dangerous. It was perfectly calculated to make me look guilty of something. The night before everything exploded, I worked late at the office. Around 8 o'clock, I realized I wasn't alone. Trent was still there too. His office door was open and he was pacing back and forth, talking on the phone in a low voice. I could only hear fragments of the conversation, but what I heard made my blood run cold. "She won't see this coming," I heard him say into the phone. "Everything is in place. By tomorrow morning, she won't have a leg to stand on." A shiver crawled up my spine. I realized in that moment that this wasn't about mistakes or performance issues. This was personal. This was deliberate. Trent had been planning something, and it was going to happen the next day. I left the office immediately. I didn't even turn off my computer properly. I just grabbed my bag and walked out to my car as fast as I could. When I got home, I checked my system logs. There it was right there in the data. A remote override at 2:18 a.m. That was 3 hours after everyone had left. Someone, Trent, had accessed my workstation remotely. He was doing it. He was actually doing it. The next morning, I walked into that conference room knowing that everything was about to fall apart. And it did. I was crushed when I saw those screenshots, but I was also calm. I was thinking. I was analyzing. I was already several steps ahead of where Trent thought I was. The room was full of people staring at me like I was guilty. The evidence was right there on the screen. My name on every login. My account accessing files I never touched. My credentials used to do things I never did. But I knew the truth. I knew that I was the victim here, not the perpetrator. Trent was building his case with dramatic flair, presenting each piece of evidence like he was a detective solving a crime. He was completely confident that he had me trapped. He was enjoying this moment. He was savoring the look of shock on my face. The humiliation was real and intense, but underneath was something stronger. It was clarity. It was knowing what had really happened. It was knowing that I had the proof in my backup logs. I realized something crucial as I sat there. The timestamps proved I wasn't even in the building when most of those accesses happened. I was at home. I was asleep. I had no way to have done any of the things they were accusing me of. That was my edge. I spent the first 48 hours at home, mostly in a daze. But on the second day, something switched inside me. Panic turned into purpose. I opened my laptop and checked my system logs. The backup had come through perfectly. My script had recorded everything. I scrolled through the entries with shaking hands. There was clear as day. Access override from Trent's device ID. His personal computer. His specific device signature. Not mine. Not someone spoofing my account. Using his own credentials to access my workstation. But there was more. Trent had also changed the audit trail itself, trying to cover his tracks. Except he'd left behind a digital fingerprint. He'd accessed the audit logs from his own device at 3:47 a.m. and made modifications. But the system still had records of when those modifications happened. It was perfect. It was undeniable. It was exactly what I needed. I spent the rest of the day making copies of everything. I printed out the most important documents. I highlighted patterns and connections. I cross-checked timestamps against my location data and calendar entries. My logic became sharper than my panic. My fear transformed into strategy. I wasn't just going to show them the evidence. I was going to present it in a way that made it impossible for them to dismiss. Over the next few days, I became methodical and precise. I wasn't impulsive. I wasn't acting out of anger or hurt feelings. I was strategic and calculated, the same way Trent had been when he set this trap for me. I documented every anomaly with timestamps and supporting evidence. I created a timeline showing exactly when the hacks happened and what was accessed during each breach. I cross-referenced everything against Trent's work schedule and his known locations. One log entry showed Trent logging in from 2 locations at the exact same time on the same date. That should have been impossible unless he'd spoofed my credentials. He'd used my login credentials while simultaneously being logged in from another location. It was a rookie mistake, the kind of thing that only someone who didn't understand cybersecurity would do. I highlighted that entry in red and added a note. This was the smoking gun. This was the evidence that proved he'd stolen my credentials. I also discovered that he'd accessed a financial report 3 hours before accusing me of tampering with it. The timestamp was right there. He'd read the report, seen something he didn't like, and then blamed me for changing it. The breakthrough came when I found a remote session request authenticated with my credentials, but originating from Trent's terminal. It was the piece that tied everything together. It proved that he'd specifically used my login information to access the system from his personal computer. I printed it out and stared at it for a long time. This one piece of evidence could destroy his career. This one printout could prove that I was innocent and that he was guilty. I discovered something else too. He'd accessed a financial report 3 hours before accusing me of tampering with it in the conference room. The timestamp was undeniable. The device ID was undeniable. The evidence was overwhelming. I realized I had to be careful about how I presented this. If I just went to HR with a stack of printouts and started making accusations, they might dismiss me. I needed an ally. I needed someone who understood this stuff as well as I did. I needed to talk to Marina Patel. Marina worked in cybersecurity. We'd met years ago at a company training session, and we'd stayed in touch. She understood technology. She understood networks and systems and access logs. More importantly, she would know how to present this evidence in a way that even non-technical people would understand. While I was compiling everything, I discovered something massive buried deep in the logs. Trent hadn't just framed me. He'd covered up his own data manipulation. He'd been accessing financial records that he shouldn't have had access to. He'd been making changes to client accounts without proper authorization. It wasn't technically illegal in the sense of being criminal. It wasn't like he was stealing money. But it was definitely wrong. It was definitely unethical. It was definitely career-ending if it got out. More than that, I realized Drew might be involved. I checked Drew's access history in my logs. He hadn't hacked anything, and he wasn't complicit in framing me. But he'd accessed files that Trent had given him access to. Trent had been using Drew's credentials too, likely without Drew even knowing it. Poor Drew had no idea that his login was being used to cover Trent's tracks. I found records showing that Trent had used 3 different accounts to frame me. His own, Drew's, and even briefly used a contractor's credentials from a third-party vendor. He'd been thorough in hiding his tracks. He'd created a web of false evidence designed to make it look like I was hacking accounts and tampering with files. It was sick. It was calculating. It was exactly the kind of thing a desperate man would do. I reached out to Marina through a personal message, not through work email. I didn't want to leave a trail that anyone could follow. I asked her if she had time to meet for coffee and said it was important. We met at a small cafe near the office on a Tuesday afternoon. I showed her the logs and the evidence. I explained what had happened. I told her about Trent framing me, about the fake accesses, about everything. Her eyes widened as she read through the documentation. She looked at me with a mix of shock and anger. "Paisley, this is indisputable," she said quietly. "This is absolute proof." She studied the documents for another few minutes, then looked up. "There's more here too. Look at this. Trent bypassed authentication using a stolen session token. That's not just hacking. That's sophisticated. That's targeted." Marina agreed to help me format everything in a way that even non-technical people would understand. She created a summary document explaining each piece of evidence in simple language. She added diagrams showing the access patterns. She created a timeline that made the whole conspiracy clear. Within hours we had a complete case file. I noticed that Trent started acting differently. He sent an email to HR asking them to confirm the termination meeting details. He was rushing the process. Why would he do that? Why would he want to move quickly? The answer was obvious. He knew that I might discover something if given enough time. He wanted me gone before I could mount any defense. I kept checking my email obsessively. I was waiting for the official termination notice, the one that would end my career at Hartwell. Instead, what came was something unexpected. I received an anonymous message. Just a single line. "Check Drew's access history." I didn't know who had sent it, but I knew it was important. Someone on the inside was trying to help me. Someone who knew what was happening and wanted to stop it. I went back through the logs and looked at Drew's access patterns more carefully. Found something interesting. Drew had accessed files that he shouldn't have. Files that only Trent should have been able to access. Files related to client accounts and financial transactions. Drew hadn't done anything wrong. But Trent had been using his credentials to make it look like Drew was involved. I dug deeper into Drew's logs. I could see that he'd been given access to sensitive systems right around the time that Trent started planning this whole thing. Trent had been setting up his scapegoat. He'd been giving Drew credentials and access rights specifically so that he could use them later to frame other people. Poor Drew didn't even know it was happening. He was just doing his job, thinking that Trent was giving him more responsibility because he was valued. But I could see the pattern now. Trent had used Drew's account to access files. He'd made it look like Drew was tampering with records. Then, when the time came, Trent could have blamed everything on Drew if needed. My logs showed Trent using 3 different accounts to frame me. His own device ID on the initial hack. Drew's credentials on several of the fake accesses. And then a contractor's temporary credentials on one access attempt. It was a web of lies and false evidence designed to confuse anyone who looked at it without really understanding what they were looking at. But I understood it perfectly. I spent the next week compiling everything into one final report. I included timestamps, device IDs, remote overrides, session tokens, and authentication inconsistencies. I created a document that was absolutely bulletproof. There was no way to argue with it. There was no way to deny it. Marina helped me format it for people who weren't technical. She added explanations. She created visual diagrams. She made it accessible to HR people who'd never seen an access log before. The report was beautiful in its clarity. It was devastating in its implications. I scheduled a meeting with HR before my official termination meeting. I told them I had information they needed to see before finalizing any decisions about my employment. They probably thought I was going to beg for my job back or apologize for things I never did. They had no idea what was coming. I walked into the HR office on a Thursday morning carrying my report. Trent walked in a few minutes later, confident that this was just formality. He expected me to be fired. He expected to watch me get escorted out the same way he'd had me escorted out before. I walked in calm. I slid a folder across the table toward them. "Before we proceed, you'll want to see the full access audit," I said quietly. Trent's face went pale. He knew exactly what I was showing them. Char started reading. I watched their faces change as they went through page after page of evidence. They started asking questions. They looked confused. Then they looked shocked. Why is your device ID in every unauthorized access? HR asked Trent directly. That was the moment he knew it was over. That was the moment he understood that I'd won. Trent started denying everything. He sweated. He stammered. He tried to explain that the logs must be incorrect. He suggested that maybe I'd somehow falsified the evidence. He claimed that this was all some kind of setup designed to frame him in retaliation. None of it mattered. HR went through the report page by page, and with each page, Trent's defense crumbled. Marina's technical summary was devastating. It was clear. It was logical. It was impossible to refute. Every single incident traced back to him. Every override. Every altered trail. Every false flag planted on my account. We need to bring in IT security to verify this, HR said finally. Trent tried one more time to argue, but they weren't listening anymore. The evidence was too strong. The pattern was too obvious. Security confirmed my findings completely. They went through the access logs independently and reached the exact same conclusions. Every incident traced back to Trent's device. Every unauthorized access originated from his terminal. Every remote session was authenticated with his credentials or credentials he had access to. Every override. Every altered trail. Every false flag planted on my account was traced directly back to him. The IT security director sat back in his chair and shook his head. This is one of the most deliberate and calculated attacks I've ever seen, he said. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. This was premeditated. HR turned to me and said, Paisley, we owe you an apology. Those words didn't make everything okay. They didn't undo the humiliation. They didn't give me back my time. But they meant something. They meant that the truth had come out. They meant that I was vindicated. Trent was removed from the meeting. Security escorted him out, the same way he'd had me escorted out just days before. He didn't get to say anything. He didn't get to defend himself anymore. He was just taken away, his career in ruins, his reputation destroyed. His future promotions gone forever. I sat in that office and watched it happen. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt happy. Instead, I mostly felt tired. All of the energy that had been keeping me going just drained out of me. HR asked if I'd be willing to step into a new position. A leadership role. Higher pay. Greater authority. Clean record. Everything I'd been working toward before Trent started his campaign against me. I accepted with steady hands. Not out of spite but out of pride. I was going to do this job better than anyone else had ever done it. I was going to help make sure this never happened again. I was settling into my new office a few days later when Drew pulled me aside. He looked ashamed even though he'd done nothing wrong. He confessed that he'd suspected something was happening with Trent, but he'd been afraid to say anything. He was terrified of losing his job. I told him quietly, "We don't rise by fearing people like that." I meant it. I'd spent so long being afraid of Trent, afraid of making him angry, afraid of standing up to him, and it had gotten me nowhere. It had gotten me framed and humiliated. The moment I stopped being afraid and started fighting back, everything changed. I watched the sun hit my nameplate on my new office door. Paisley Martinez, Director of Compliance. I didn't win by fighting dirty. I didn't win by hacking his account back or planting false evidence. I won by knowing the rules better than the man who'd broken them. I won by documenting everything. I won by staying calm and strategic. I won because I was smarter and better prepared. Strength isn't loud. I learned that through everything that happened. Strength isn't about yelling or fighting or making a big scene. Real strength is steady. Real strength is quiet and methodical. Real strength always leaves a trail. The trail I left was made of evidence and logic and the truth. It was made of something that couldn't be denied or disputed. It was made of facts. Trent had tried to destroy me. He'd tried to frame me for crimes I didn't commit. He tried to make me look incompetent and untrustworthy and like someone who couldn't be trusted with anything important. But he'd underestimated me. He'd never expected that a compliance analyst would understand security logs well enough to catch him. He'd never expected that I would have the courage to fight back. He'd never expected that I would win. I sat at my desk in my new office and thought about the girl who'd walked in here just days ago, confused and frightened and humiliated. I'd survived something that should have destroyed me. I'd turned something that looked like the end into a new beginning. And I'd done it by staying true to who I was. Methodical, careful, honest, and unwilling to break under pressure. Those qualities didn't make for exciting stories. But they were the things that mattered when everything else fell apart.